Village Idiot Audio presents The Disembodied Parts, a Rhapsody. Performance by Carlisle Edwards, from the novel by Pablo D'Stair. Episode 3, November.
I know exactly what I want, I beseeched, slapped both palms to the glass door of Collector's World. Quite the scene. I felt like primetime television. But nope. Shine and Cohen, the jolly proprietors, both shrugged, mouthing, "We're closed," and "tomorrow." Panting, still winded due to the sprint from my dad's car, which now idled around the corner, I flattened my money to the glass. 1 minute, sirs, I adjured. 30 seconds. Shine moseyed over after making me sweat it out another beat, pouting while he undid the latch how I was no fun. But over my shoulder, as I went to the bin to retrieve my purchase, I heard him grant, "No, that's not true, you're fun," after which he and Cohen did impersonations of my begging at the door. It was interesting how they'd take my cash but not ring the sale until morning. Cash register counted down already. Money left on the counter. The world is odd, though what could it matter to me? Because here it was, the Steve Rude sketchbook, volume housed in plastic sheath with cardboard backing. $20 plus tax I'd paid to the penny. My dad had agreed to let me make the purchase conditional to his inspecting the volume's contents. And no, I couldn't even look through it in the car on the drive home. But I'd looked through it plenty before, which is why my fears. Perhaps the amount of nude sketches in the book would have it taken away from me. Shine and Cohen had been reluctant in a vague way to sell it when I'd first broached the transaction, but I'd sworn I had parental okay. They'd even phoned my mom to be covered so far as civil suits went, forewarned her of the TNA element. "It's elegant, but they're quite naked," Shine had said, qualifying, "yeah," after a pause while my mom had pressed for specifics. "Naked every place." Thus, I'd been building up an eloquent defense of art and the like. Indeed, I'd got so anxious about this that even before my dad cracked the cover of the thing, I'd started in. My erudite defense would be Plan B, only dipped into in the face of belligerence, promising how, "I know there's tons of naked women in it. I promise I couldn't be bothered. I'm planning to tear those pages out to avoid any chance of being waylaid from my true aims. Don't worry about my barking up that tree." Turns out, my dad didn't give a tinker's damn about the nudes. In fact, the old man gave a very well-articulated speech exactly in line with what I was going to say had push come to shove. What he seemed to find a disdain concerning, for reasons which passeth understanding so far as I was concerned, was how a few pages contained cuss words. He would allow me to have the book, but needed to scribble these words out in order to make the volume less incendiary. Okay. Did he think I'd object? If anything, I wanted to point out how, as I already knew what words were being obfuscated, covering them over in ballpoint ink did little to take the curse off anything. But I kept it cool. Let him thoroughly redact the word shit from the phrase, "These pens are really full of shit sometimes," on the very last page, a word bubble affixed to an ink rendering of W.C. Fields. No skin off my teeth. Of course, the nudes had been my primary objective, not to devalue Steve Rude's other offerings, my favorite artist, bar none. And this sketchbook was a treasure trove, exceeding my expectations incalculably. Look here at some page from an OMAC comic he'd done in college, laid side by side with some pages from Nexus issue 50 to show off certain interesting similarities in concept and layout. But the nudes, well, how about I just come out and say it, same as anyone else looking might? They were exquisite, the way bumping into a common tongue in babble might be. The pencil work, pen strokes, the perfection of lines, of curves uninterrupted, of lip and hip, shoulders, dimpled lower back, all top dollar. Ooh, yes. There were mysteries to unravel, a mature understanding to nourish my burgeoning talents and aesthetic. Out of my league entirely, let me add. I had in no way ever attempted to render an anatomically correct human figure before, let alone to replicate the proportions of a goddess. Hugo Plyankoff, MD, the characters in there were rendered as such. Small circle for head, oval, or a large circle if the character was portly or muscularized, for body. Stick arms, stick legs, hands and feet merely shaded in circles. Make no mistake, I could accomplish a bunch within the obstruction of my lack of refined talent, but I made no bones about admitting my skills weren't traditional or rarefied. No, not like Alvin. There was an illustrator, and don't you forget who told you so. The main pitfall I would face with my art lessons, especially during the initial learning curve wherein I'd have to scrutinize these drawings and fail, tap my way nearer to anything even resembling a proper woman one scrawl at a time, was how to go about sketching tons of naked ladies without my parents getting hip to the scene and trying to figure out what gives and how to gum me up. They were sensitive to artistic objectives, my mom and dad, no trouble there. But I wasn't quite ready to put my faith in their choosing not to err on the side of assuming they had a budding pornographer to set right if they stumbled upon stacks of drawings depicting unclothed women produced by their 9-year-old second-born. Solution? In the weeks prior to purchasing the sketchbook, I'd made a survey of all of the books about cats we had in the house, a lot, and persuaded my mom to buy me a load of small spiral notebooks, pocket-sized, from the grocery store. The covers of these I had labeled cat stuff, and made certain, with an eye shot of my mom, to be seen attempting realist renditions of felines, and to find countless excuses to show off the works in progress to my dad, sometimes going so far as to leave a cat stuff notebook on the dining table in amongst his work papers, and to play act, "Have you seen my sketchbook?" of an evening. By now, prying eyes would be inured to these sketchbooks, and the remaining blank notebook I designated for nudies would slink under the radar. It buttressed my drooping confidence when Alvin remarked how he thought I was getting breasts down admirably. He allowed I had quite the knack for a little kid who'd never glimpsed the real deals. Except on Rumpole, I reminded him, but he politically acted as though he'd not heard. Here, Donovan piped in. "What about Rumpole?" Trying to put enough authority in his voice to nip further conversation on the subject in the bud, Alvin said I harbored delusions how some chick had flashed Rumpole. No one's gonna flash their personal tits at Leo McKern, ICHABOD. Leo McKern has kids. One is even on the show. But, very sophistically, Donovan submitted, this doesn't mean his lover specifically had to have flashed him any skin. There's all kinds of ways to keep a shirt on. I didn't bother pointing out how McKern wasn't party to the scene in question, or how, either way, they could have filmed the topless bit in an entirely different take or just asked him to leave the room a minute if it was going to stall production. Alvin did have a few stern critiques about my rendering of the collarbone. You should know what that looks like just from anyone. Naked ladies aren't different from common everyday people in certain respects. That's just there as a placeholder for now, I explained. Had to repeat this remark when Donovan mentioned the triangle with a line down its center I jotted to designate the vaginal area looked uncannily similar to how he'd drawn a chicken feet in kindergarten. It's harder to draw that realistically than you'd think. Believe me, I've been studying these drawings diligently and I just don't get it. But we had batter fish to fry, Alvin reminded us, imploring me to back-burner my kinky hobbies at least for the time being. Tonight was the night we'd have it out with the Ghostbusters. Close proximity combat. No holds barred. We were gonna ride down on them like gangbusters, and by the time we were done, they'd never show their sorry tails in these environs again. Wabash Moon is our beat, I wooted, trying for a hoorah from the others, but they had no idea what I meant. It's from a story called The Jukebox Kid. This elaboration made no difference to them. From that old Shadow pulp mag I bought. Oh, Alvin recalled that now. Recalled I'd spent $48 on it, and boy howdy hadn't it turned out to be racist. Only the advertisements were racist. If I said so, he said. Besides which, we were at war in those days. The Japs actually had a secret new airplane called Zero. Were we not supposed to get the word out? He conceded the point. Took a jab at how another advert had touted the miracle of asbestos, a revelation Donovan mumbled, Jesus, about, although I didn't see what the fuss was. Do you even know what asbestos is? Do you? Yes. But did you at my age, I mean? Alvin was right, though. We needed to focus. We are at war. That's who's at war. In the present, not the 19-whenevers. Okay, I agreed, especially when Donovan said keeping ourselves tight and functioning as a unit could be the difference between a black eye and a regular eye. Had I ever had a black eye? No. Did I feel like starting tonight? I had to admit I'd like to avoid it as far as I had control over. And what would you tell Mom and Dad? Alvin added with a sagacious nod. I'd probably just tell Dad Alvin had done it in a fit of pique. But I didn't tell Alvin this because of the previously made good point about harmony in the ranks. Impossible to believe, but my dad had agreed to let Alvin and I, along with Donovan, sleep out back in the area of trees between our row of houses and the row flanking ours. Up to this moment, his avowed and militant stance was staunchly anti-sleepover. His reasons were many and varied, but could be summed up thus. He didn't trust, believe to be sane, or want to even peripherally have dealings with the adults responsible for progenerating any child other than us. Alvin had dished it out slick about how, in school we're reading something by Jack London, and part of a graded assignment was to camp out and keep a log of it. A clever enough ruse so far as things went, though I was astonished it had passed the sniff test utterly uncontested. But here we were. The plan was, Alvin would head out first, do a thorough reconnaissance, while meantime Donovan and I manned the fort and kept up the appearance of a bona fide campout. Upon Alvin's return, we'd trek out together and split off for the attack. I was to serve as decoy, brazenly approach the gang, nunchucks concealed, as though I were a scofflaw out to get in good with them. Concurrently, Alvin and Donovan would approach from the hill across the street from the bus stop, starting 70 yards apart. They'd pincer in from east and west, or left and right. Alvin changed this to just to avoid confusion, and, knock wood, approach the turned backs of unsuspecting foes. The Ghostbusters, caught with their pants handily down, would be fish in a barrel for Alvin's bow staff and the length of pipe Donovan had luckily discovered leaned against a dumpster 2 days previous. Once Alvin had set off, Donovan swung on the rope which once had a wood seat attached to it while I ate oatmeal cookies. He was still convinced his plan to arm ourselves with glass bottles was the better bet. He reiterated how A, these punks would be drinking, and B, all a person had to do was watch any movie to confirm breaking a bottle over someone's head put them down like a champ. We couldn't even break bottles against that tree branch, Don. Tree branches are pliable, plus things bounce off them. He did have a point how we'd have the adrenaline of the moment working on our behest. I'm guessing they have beer bottles is all. So this way we'd be evenly matched. I still wished we'd decided to throw rocks from a distance, but Donovan sided with Alvin how this failed our main objective. To wit, if the Ghostbusters started getting hit by rocks, they just run away and have no idea what the intent of those rocks had exactly been. Afterward, how are we supposed to ever dream we'd get the drop on them? Reinforcements, Donovan said. Other Ghostbusters. All poppycock so far as I was concerned. But Alvin also made the good point how once you throw a rock, you lose control. Someone might turn all of a sudden, whacko, lose an eye. The same isn't true with nunchucks, pipes, and bamboo staffs. We'd have a lot of control with those. We didn't want to blind these Visigoths. They just needed to find another bus stop. I couldn't reckon a politic way to float to Donovan how hitting someone with a rusty pipe might not be advisable in application. Could lead to infection if nothing else. We were stealthing our way past what was known as the Little Park, the most popular of some half-dozen play areas dotting the development, en route to the bus stop. Alvin had been away a solid hour. Were he wheezing his last, rolled into some ditch, bag of lawn clippings slashed open, dumped to obscure his makeshift grave, we wanted to have shown at least a minimum effort toward rescue. Not that I was truly worried. Alvin would have known to play possum, act knocked out before he'd actually been knocked out had he found himself outnumbered or the tide otherwise turned against him. We'd all discussed this. An official strategy. Secondary application. Act knocked out, so the person fighting you turns to attack someone still viable, then stand up to catch him out from behind unawares. The bus stop. Deserted. Silent. Cold. Something in the air smelled sweet the way garbage could. I'm certain they haven't killed him literally, Ick, Donovan reassured, queasy-voiced, as I twirled my nunchucks, peering from my concealment behind a damp woodpile outside some house's backyard fence. But where was Alvin? Where was anybody? We opted to make a wide, strategic approach, back through the little park, up the hill into our pal Quincy's neighborhood, across the road at the development's third entrance, crested the hill by the office buildings under construction. We kept ducked down, sprinted the field, got round to where Alvin had said he'd do his sentry work. Nobody. Nothing. Bus stop deserted even yet. Mint orange streetlight falling chill on empty brick. Hop skipped over and stood inside the house-like structure. 0 beer bottles, cigarette butts, candy wrappers, signs of struggle, blood stains. It does smell a little like cat piss, Donovan observed. He probably meant dog piss. Would have been more accurate anyway. Why I split hairs, though, seeing as I got his drift. Suddenly, Donovan yelped, backed up, this nudging me forcefully enough I slipped and struck against the rough brick where two walls cornered. The seesaw clanging of his dropped pipe and my shoes scuffing kept me from hearing exactly what he was saying, pointing through the window at the curved brick wall with the neighborhood's name affixed in a groomed patch of shrubbery on its other side. Donovan leaned to the window edge taut, and I stiffly joined him. A ruckus of mulch. There! Do you see him? Flickering of shadow accompanied by skittering clickety-clack, some animal dashing across the road pavement, disappearing down an only half-graded sewer drain. Silence. Donovan said we needed to beat it. No gag. Didn't even bother retrieving his bludgeon. He was calmer once we neared my house, but I hadn't yet got any semblance of a proper debriefing. Was clearing my throat, addressing myself to motion as though to indicate I needed answers. But what in hell is that? I hissed instead. From some 80 yards off, we scoped the beam from a flashlight slicing left-right, right-left, up-downing and diagonaling the area by the rope swing where we had our camp. And while it would have been sounder to have hung back, gathered facts, some kind of shock response numbed both Donovan and I, we strode forward, casual as can be. My dad trained a flashlight on us, leveling the light in our eyes longer than was strictly necessary, the gesture not seeming tender or parental. Where had we been? A fair question. I suggested we'd been just over at the park a quick minute, because we thought we heard fireworks and wanted to see if we could get a look from the top of the slide. Very glad Donovan was no longer armed, seeing as I was already having to add, and these nunchucks are something I found by coincidence. Cue Alvin making his way, bow staff twirling, ever so carefree, whisper bellowing, "Turn off the light, morons, and stop talking or you'll wake up Dad." Comic beat. "Oh, hi, Dad." Comic beat. "We were just talking about you." I was in the school library voting for Ross Perot. The man had quite a constituency so far as I could tell. Handily secured the election, only a few kids tossing folded slips of paper into the box supporting Clinton. Evidence suggested they did so merely to give them an excuse to say Bubba as many times as possible during the day. It was clear these children didn't even know that wasn't their so-called preferred candidate's surname. And if these were the sort of followers the man was looking to garner with his lowest common denominator charisma, well, I could see why talk radio had it in for the guy. I'd been hipped to Perot by Frank, a man who lived 3 houses down. He was wont to invite neighborhood kids and their sundry moms and dads down to his basement to flaunt the neat things he adorned his life with. Satellite television, Super Nintendo, gun safe. Vote for Perot. He's self-made, has a vision. Those others are dynasty politicians, bamboozlers. Don't be bamboozled, he told me once, taking a break from mowing his lawn long enough to endow me this wisdom. I won't, I vowed while he tugged on the choke and the perfect crisp of gasoline coated my nostrils. I'd learned later on how the rest of the nation hadn't been given the dope so straight, and thus the country was poised to steer onto unbelievably disastrous tracks. A kid who wanted to be my pal but frankly was a tad cloying for my likes took full advantage of our being seated together. We were to work on a cut and paste, to strike up some banter. He wasn't a bad guy, turned out. We had a lot in common. He wanted to learn Jeet Kune Do. I wanted to learn Jeet Kune Do. So I was glad to rap with them how there were advertisements in the back pages of Inside Kung Fu for various manuals or videocassette courses. I knew I was lazy as a carp when all was said and done, but had convinced myself that since I didn't want to be good, and by no means noteworthy at the martial art, even the most lackadaisical home study would serve my purposes. The kid agreed and put the matter succinctly enough. If Bruce Lee was the best, then learning from his personal playbook, even if I only wound up 1,000th as talented as the man, should put me on the same level with an intermediate student who took themselves seriously, stuck to a disciplined schedule, but only availed themselves of more commonplace instruction. But before this kid could get convinced we'd reached the bosom buddy stage, I excused myself on some pretext of remembering about a book I was supposed to borrow from my little brother who went to another school that didn't have it. I'd developed a stern addiction to Archway oatmeal cookies. Such a fiend, I carried them in my pockets and snuck bites, no matter if the time was opportune. I'd eat the cookies stacked 2 at a time because the effort and ache to my jaw of working the chewiness into swallowable slop was exquisite. True, they weren't as delectable as the hard oatmeal cookies my dad would bring home from the National Institute of Health, but there was little I could do about this, seeing as that specific variety of confection was only distributed directly by the United States federal government. Plus, even if I asked him to bring a lot home, I'd be lucky if he remembered any. Just now, I ducked down the biography aisle, tearing an oversized bite into my maw. At the window was Donovan, motioning I should join him in the hall. Mouth full, I just shrugged, sloshing of mastication soundtracking the pantomime of his insistence, my head tilting to indicate how he knew as well as I it was notoriously difficult to finagle a bathroom pass during library because the entire class always stops on the way to and from. So he motioned me to stay put while he glanced around for purposes unknown. Finally, he pulled what turned out to be a crisp dollar bill from his rear pocket and used a crayon plucked from the cart outside the near-at-hand art room to write, "Last night, cat and opossum together." When he'd cottoned to I'd read this, he flipped the bill over and started scribbling. I took a bite from a new cookie pear. The reverse of the bill read, "What parts even are left?" Before we began, we assured Donovan, who insisted on raking up graves, that, yes, our dad's a kook. He sounds like Dracula. Yes, he has a fluid relationship with logic. Yes, but he's garden variety nuts, nothing to file a report over. Here's the shot. Donovan, on the night of our Ghostbuster busting campaign, hadn't been allowed to return to his own house after my dad had terminated our campout. Indeed, he was made to sleep on the sofa while Alvin and I had been sent to our room. "No, seriously, it's 1 minute that way," he'd said. Not a chance. So I suppose I could see why it lingered on his nerves. But how did this make me or Alvin the answer men or issuers of apologia, as though either of us could explain the thought processes of a man who'd been older than both of us combined by the lead-up to the Second World War? Alvin declared enough was enough. "Facts," he insisted. "We need facts." We couldn't allow some random chatterboxes or sewing circles to confound our efforts viz. The disembodied parts. Okay, a cat and an opossum. Was this the thing? Alvin could vouch for the cat. He'd seen it when he set up his stakeout. No, there was no sign the Ghostbusters had been recently devoured. Both he and Donovan independently described its color as marmalade, which would have eased me out a heck of a lot more if marmalade was an actual color. This could be the Mandela effect for all I knew. Same with the opossum. It was the opossum I'd probably seen. But what had I seen? Could have been the cat. It was both, Donovan demanded, pressed right up on each other like they were conjoined or stitched that way. But the $20,000 question, what parts? There's only so many parts to a human body, after all. Checklist. Head, torso, taken with a grain of salt, but nevertheless. Arms left and right, hands left and right, legs left and right, feet left and right. That's a person. What about a dick or a butt? Is this where the hands on the clock had come to? Here lie the Ghostbusters, jolly rogered by a disembodied dick? And what, pray tell, would a dick kill with? Had anyone thought of that? Plus, where were the corpses, eh? Upwards of a dozen Ghostbusters just vanished into the thin night air? The butt could have. Donovan made a gesture of turning his hand from palm up to palm down, absorbed them, and finished off with a kind of slurping sound. The butt could have absorbed, bare minimum, 7 to 10 teenage hooligans. This is hysteria talking, Don. What butt could pull a feat like that? Absorb them where? He supposed I had a point. Yes, he conceded I certainly had a fair point. And on top of that, well, it's difficult to imagine a butt arming itself with something. But there aren't other parts left. Except, and keep in mind how he hated to say this, oh, Donovan truly hated to say this. What about what Dale Beach said that time? Dale Beach is probably a Ghostbuster himself. He's certifiable. Alvin concurred, but wanted to get the shot. In summary, Dale Beach once claimed there to be 2 bodies, a male and a female, which gels, frankly, with something Winshaw said. Oh, Christ Jesus, I groaned. Winshaw? Winshaw's your friend, Dick. He's not my friend. He's just someone I one time accidentally swindled out of 75 cents. That's different than friendship. Focus. What had Winshaw said? He said it all started in the Civil War. Alvin, I had to call halt. Do you have any idea how many things Winshaw claims have to do with the Civil War? On the other hand, didn't the Civil War dead roam the train tracks over in Fern Glen? Well, the Civil War dead did, yes, in fact, roam the train tracks over in Fern Glen. Didn't those same tracks connect over by Criswell Chevrolet? They did. Facts, Alvin said, fist to palm. Facts are facts. I'm all for speculation and interpretation so long as we don't forget that speculation's speculating or what interpretation's interpreting. Facts, I mumbled, testing the word out. Unless I'm wrong, Alvin sighed, end of tether. You tell me. The shape, heft, the relaxed give of this woman's buttocks was eluding me artistically. Steve Rude made his penciled sketch seem at once weightless and stoutly three-dimensionally thick, where the woman's flesh touched with the floor she posed upon. How did he capture that pressure? Page after page after page of my stabs at rendering the same image as he had produced flanks without curve, a buttock squared, almost Lego sharp, whereas he managed plush melt and delectable suppleness. I was hesitant to make fugitive, studious glimpses to the backsides of classmates, teaching staff, grocery clerks, or members of the female populace at large. The few times I did, with nary an exception, there was nothing remotely rectangular or right-angled about the anatomy. Same problem with shoulders. and Lord help me, I'd never solve the mystery of how to render an armpit with any semblance of grace. You could probably draw strong people, Andy said as I gave up this 20th time in a row. He meant my rendition of breasts, especially if depicted near underarms, seemed quite muscular. I was briefly chuffed, imagined gaining a notoriety for my depictions of hulking ladies, until he, and this he had on authority from his older sister who worked in nursing, explained how breasts couldn't be muscularized or shaped through cardiovascular or isometric efforts. They just kind of sit there and you're stuck with them, she told me. I wished breasts looked different, like something else I could already draw. Andy, sweet soul, kept on trying to buck me up, so I felt a little bit callous telling him, much though it was appreciated, the bromides could be put on ice. Listen, there's something I need to ask you to do with me, and we could easily both wind up dead, or worse. Is that okay? He wanted clarity on how we might die, but sorry, his guess was as good as mine. The situation was, he'd seen, same as I had, the Ghostbusters go into that sewer. I wouldn't go so far as saying it was faulty intelligence which stated they still use the bus stop because maybe they have splinter groups, or maybe just other people use the bus stop at night. Who knows what who saw? But we'd seen them go into the sewer ourselves. My money? They stumbled into something way above their weight class down there, interested in far more than spit-kissing them. Everyone else was chasing bogeys. I'm sorry, but I call it how I see it. And some demonstrable proof of the macabre horrors of the subterranean could go a long way toward consolidating our survival efforts. Andy couldn't argue with that. It'd help us, and would even collaterally save Nimrods who won't help themselves. This is how it would have to be. I saw no way out. We would have to, Andy and I, venture down the sewer and return with proof positive of the Ghostbusters' ghastly fate. We're talking upward of umpteen corpses. And who knows if some of them have been partially devoured or been laying in slop water all this while going goopy. I needed to impress upon Andy how even in the best case scenario, our returning unharmed physically, the shocking memories we'd be letting in would imp us for the rest of our lives. But what alternative? Blithely go our way, as though an ancient lurking terror which might well consume our neighborhood entire wasn't standing in the dark right behind us, breathing down our necks. It's not the Ghostbusters I care about. They made their beds, and if there's any good in the world, their demise can serve as a cautionary reminder to other know-it-alls who'd follow in their misguided footsteps. Andy nodded. His assent didn't strike me as entirely committal, but I'd not mention it as this was a lot to be taking in, especially with us probably only going to be alive another 3/4 of an hour. It was like there were 2 echoes, 2 chills, one from inside my nostrils, the breath coiling into a whistle in their resonant tuning fork, the other stirred by our movements, whispers, our entire presence exhaling back off from the rough, dense curve of the tunnel's unlit concrete. We kept our legs spread wide, our hands touching the walls, arms raised a bit, rather as though we were juddering letter X's instead of human beings. Little need to keep such a pose. What moisture there was amounted to a modest slick akin to a semi-liquefied fruit roll-up, grimy dribbles along the exact center of the floor. Odd how this wetness would dry out entirely for a length, then suddenly be present again, thick, thin. Whatever it was nothing much like water. In fact, certain side pipes dripped like runny noses, and the plink of actual water was as one would expect. The puddles mild, appropriately deep, no evidence any thickening would occur, a gummy damp be given longevity. Were the center slicks even water then? What else? Mucosa? There was something membranous about the stains. I could tell Endy felt it too. Our X shape may be the same unconscious recoil from an instinctually perceived danger. After all, we hadn't discussed the pose, and I was bringing up the rear, had only noticed Endy's orientation after a good length of travel, mine not in mimic of his. The tunnel narrowed, at first imperceptibly, then making its slimness known by an ache in my low back. More cobwebs were present, and somehow they all had plant life caught in them, no presence of drained insect husks. Why would the tunnels get dirtier further in? What leaves, weeds would get down here, and under which circumstance? Why this scent like the rusted underside of a car becoming denser and denser? There would be a tunnel joint coming up. Ahead of us it glared in the appearance of a gigantic eyeball, our blinks making it seem as though a gargantuan entity was blinking, and with each bat of its lids down, all around would go black. Perhaps really never blinked at all. I supposed Endy, like me, was imagining this joint to be our destination. I figured he, like me, was relieved at the tunnel getting wider, taller again, relieved and disquieted. It was evident as we got used to the quality of light, or as we passed areas where street gutters allowed in ambient illumination, how the tunnel shrank even narrower further along after the joint. Our walk had an air of peristalsis to it. Due to my squinting and the rising aches at my shoulders, I felt masticated. And frankly, the refrigerator aromas I couldn't quite single out particulars of made my head feel oblong. My perception could easily be convinced we were traveling straight down rather than immediately ahead. Wait, Endy suddenly hiccuped, hissed. My head bonked the tunnel roof, teeth clicking hard enough that if my tongue had been between them, it would have been snipped off at its tip as though by a cigar cutter. What? Wait. I waited. What, man? He turned and looked back behind me the way we'd come. How far are we? Not far. What was he driving at? He wanted to know where the joint, just ahead now, would let out. How would I know? Are we under the park or under the road? Now this was a genuinely fine question. I tried to gauge if we journeyed far enough to be past the tennis and basketball courts. Didn't seem like it. Yet, yeah, I got what Endy was saying. Why is there a joint to the tunnel there? Where's the light coming from? The road? Wouldn't it be coming from the other way? And did we remember there being a rain gutter? I didn't think so. Had we started going sideways? Endy was ahead of me on that. No, man, I can see straight out to where we came in. If the tunnel had a bend, we'd not be able to see out to the creek. If the road was so near, we'd hear some intermittent traffic, right? We could hear the burble from the creek, bird song, lawnmower, laughter from behind us, but only to the terminus of our own huffs out noses in the other direction. Where are we? Endy finally said, exactly as I easily might have. At our feet lay evidence enough to sway the sternest skeptic. My insides curdled, yet I'd admit a thrill my hunch had proved out. Splayed open, face down, were 3 pornographic magazines. More were nearby, sludgy in a tilting stack, fusing into each other, a lump of scintillating cartilage. Andy's nerves showed in his fidgeting lips the way he worked at his shoulder cramp. "Of course it means the Ghostbusters were here," I snapped when he tried to comfort himself with rhetorical what-ifs. "You could dispute this?" Yes or no, we'd seen a dark-clothed group of older kids with flashlights sneaking through the woods. Yes? So that's for starters. Later, an abandoned flashlight nearby this very tunnel. Real or make-believe? Real. This is causal reasoning. My dad's crazy for it. The Greeks invented it, he says. Andy was sobered by this, and I proud of my old man's bookworming. So what do we discover on inspection? The suggestive and outright smutty visual materials one would exactly expect the Ghostbusters to hoard. A lot of them are 10th graders, don't forget. Maybe Andy had lost sight of that for a moment, but his synapses were popping proper now. Look it, I deduced at him. These magazines were clearly discarded in a hurry, most of them only half read. Thus, we factually conclude whatever happened here was quick, merciless, and final. Should we get out? The question hung heavy, Andy's eyes unfocused over the illicit mess. We'd be okay for the time being. The mags were damp. Everything must have gone south ages ago. No one chucks this kind of stuff down so callously without fine call to. In a way, it was pitiable. Those hapless goons fancied they'd lucked onto the ideal hidey hole. Little did they know how dearly it had cost them. "We take the mags, right?" Andy asked, obviously knowing of course we did. I think he felt asking took the curse off being pegged grave robbers. He poked the more or less ruined stack with his toe. I urged caution. We'd best to let them dry if we wanted to salvage the boodle. A clever man'd tear each page out. Why's that? No pages'll stiff together as they dry. And he looked up with growing respect for my cool head and resourcefulness. Meanwhile, I didn't much care for these small tunnels going off in 3 directions from the joint. Andy saw me looking. Why are those small all of a sudden? And see how rich with viable spider webs, laced all around with the snot glop, too. This place was like an on-purpose trap all along, don't you think? Or a nest, I thought, but dared not utter. Gathering all my bravery, I crouched low to cock my head, glare down one of these thin apertures. Too small for me to wriggle through, even were I to attempt. You'd get stuck even if you used a skateboard to scoot on, I concurred. The stack of semi-ruined mags began tearing no matter how gingerly we lifted it. How the heck were we supposed to get these home, broad daylight, moving 0.6 miles per hour all the while? Parents had a tendency to notice things like that. Go home for plastic bags? Backpack? How much daylight's left? Oh, a bunch. It's not even noon, probably. We could make the trip, get back. What if they're gone? Someone stumbles on in here while we're absent. It was a possibility. I hated to say so. But again, logic. Would we be able to face our reflections blowing an opportunity like this? You live closer, Andy. I'll stay here. Just hurry. He would. Also, maybe he ought to come back armed.
The Disembodied Parts is presented by Village Idiot Audio. Produced by Lisette Goins and Denver Gregories. Performance by Carlisle Edwards. From the novel by Pablo D'Stair. Audio supervisor Remy Falk. Music performed by Loyalty Freak.